Under the hill in the darkened wood, where the winter snows lay deep and white, where the walnuts grew for the squirrel's food, and the owl kept a vigil watch by night, there are two little graves, unkempt and wild, and each is the cot of a slumbering child. No roses in the budding spring were seen to bloom above their heads. No gift did the hand of memory bring, no tapestry for their lonely beds, but a stranger hand above each face placed a rough-hewn plank to mark the place, and lettered the boards as best he could, with the simple phrase, "Babes in Wood." When I passed the spot in the moonlight shades, the trees cast their shadows upon the snow. No sound in the wood nor the Everglades can disturb the slumberers below. And my thoughts go forward to God's own time for the two little strangers, cold and still, when their song shall be set to a better rhyme as they wing their way from the snow-clad hill.
12 years ago, on November 18th, an event occurred over my shoulder that left an indelible mark and solidified the sentiment that there are things in this world for which logic and reason are abandoned. The evening began when I journeyed to the local park of Churubusco, Indiana for some adventure. I soon entered the wooded area for some exploring, using the trails that were installed by the local Boy Scouts. I ventured on and off the path looking for any unique and interesting features. At one point, I crossed the bridge and rounded the corner up the small incline as you saw me just do, when I noticed something that left me dumbfounded. What I witnessed appeared to be a white plastic shopping bag being carried by the wind through the woods about 200 feet behind me and moving to the left and away from me. I say white plastic bag because that was what my brain assumed it to be, as it had the same color, form, and size. As the evening was progressing, a rainstorm was blowing through and the wind would have been blowing perpendicular to the object's path of flight, and inside the woods the air was much calmer, so any explanation of trash being carried by the wind can be disregarded. I stared at a loss for words, trying to discern what I was witnessing, when I decided to take off after it. I searched in vain until darkness set in, finding no clues as to what I saw. I returned home to an empty house, anxious to come up with an explanation for the object I witnessed. My sister soon arrived home, and I was eager to discuss my story when she informed me of someone finding the graves of two small girls in the woods. The babes in the woods, as the legend holds, who died during the era of the pioneers traveling west in a covered wagon. The following afternoon, we explored together with a camera in hand, but nothing of interest occurred as I retraced the events of the previous afternoon. Following our expedition, we went to the local newspaper and found the article that chronicled the discovery of the graves. I would like to leave the viewer to reach their own conclusion. Was it a plastic shopping bag ostensibly defying the laws of physics? Could it have been an animal that was spooked by my presence? Or could there really exist spirits tethered to their resting place of their corporeal bodies? I returned to these woods many times over the next few weeks, seeking answers to the questions burning my curiosity, coming up empty-handed in my pursuit. While I rationally believe that what I witnessed was an owl hunting, I would like to believe that there are things in this world that cannot be explained, that the tragic death of two young girls whose souls were bound to this location, continuing on in death the same as they lived in life. The production of this video began when I discovered the story in a PDF from a dissertation written by John Gutowski that was later published into a book in 1998. That book is no longer in print, and my library was unable to find a copy to borrow. The Churubusco History Center does own a copy of the dissertation, and I will link to the PDF in the description. Quoting Leonard Rapp, a man who grew up in the area. I remember asking my grandfather McGuire if there was any tradition about these babes. He said there wasn't none. The only tradition was that they was buried out there. I remember when I was a kid in the first grade at school, we come out here and cleaned up the grave. There was one stone about 7 to 8 inches long, and it had a cross about 4 inches high cut in it. There was a bunch of stones around it, about a dozen of them, all as big as a man's fist. We also found an old board that had an inscription burned into it with a hot rock, but we never bothered to take it down. So the story goes, there was a family of early settlers out here in a cabin. It ain't here no more, but the family would have been the Colliers, and these two babes in the woods would have been the Collier girls. You know, it's just a story. There's babes in the woods buried all over the country. Note the name Colliers. I will return to them briefly. Now quoting Henry Flowers. On the southwest slope of a small wood lot on my father's farm near Churubusco, Indiana, there is a grave which is said to be the burial place of two small babes who died many years ago while being carried across the country in a pioneer's wagon. I first heard the story of the grave through my parents when they purchased the farm in 1922. I believe that in the town of Churubusco and the immediate country around the story of the babes is known to many of the people. Previous to Flowers' ownership of the farm, it is my understanding that the former owners, the Bowmans, considered the site so sacred that they erected a small square fence around it to keep livestock from trampling over it. Several times I have found that persons from the town have laid fresh violets and other wild flowers they have picked in the woods about the grave on the site. This seems to be proof that the legend is known to many persons. Within the last few days when I paid a visit to the woods, and as always to the grave, I noted that another cross had been added to the place. It was carved in the same dimensions as the one in stone and adorned a rough piece of what I took to be hawthorn wood. Some confusion came up with the approximate location of the graves when the story showed a map that had the location of the graves, but the poor scaling of the map led me to want to know the exact location of the Flowers farm to see if it really could have been in the park or if it could have been further north. My sister and I headed to the Whitley County Recorder's office to find the deed to the Flowers farm. Since we had the approximate time the land was purchased, according to Henry Flowers, we were able to locate the deed in about 15 minutes of searching. The land was purchased in December of 1921, and the deed was filed on January 5, 1922. Frank Flowers purchased the farm from the Strauss Brothers Company, which acquired the land from Powell Bauman. By happenstance, the recorder's office had a map from 1862 showing who owned what land at that time. I went to look at the map after the clerk asked us if we understood how to read the deed. At that time, I noticed who owned the land during 1862. I have marked the location that matches up with the park on the 1862 map, and again showing the modern GIS map. We know this was a part of the Flowers farm, and that the Colliers owned the land in 1862, the north half of the northeast quarter of Section 14. A week or two later, I was shooting B-roll in the woods when the park superintendent curiously asked me if I was taking photos. I told him I was filming a short documentary and inquired if he knew the location of the graves. He informed me the graves were no longer there, and that with the development of Thresher's Ridge, the graves were probably in the backyard of one of the houses in a cul-de-sac. He told me he had a photo of Marcia Flowers, who was the daughter of Frank Flowers, placing flowers on the graves. I asked if I could have a copy, and he said he would look, but that I could also find it at the History Center. He further stated that the park was partly to blame for the graves being lost, and wished that he had done more to preserve the graves. Finally, he expressed to me that he was happy I was making a film about this story. The following week, I went to the History Center and asked about the photo of Marcia Flowers. A short time later, I was provided a copy of the photo, as well as 2 newspaper articles. One article was from September 26, 2001, and the other was from May 28, 2003. I did not receive a full copy of the first article, but it says that the photo of Marcia Flowers was published on August 8, 1940, in an edition of the New Sentinel. The limestone marker shown in the photo disappeared in the 1960s, and its location is unknown. Local Churubusco resident Bob Sade was able to locate the graves in 2001 from historical accounts, which was made easy with the stones that surrounded the graves, as well as the fact that no vegetation will grow on the spot. The second article talks about how the graves had received interest from local citizens who wished to preserve them when Thresher's Ridge was in the process of being expanded by developer Ralph Biggs of Ideal Homes Incorporated, and the developers were unaware of the graves. A local hiker of the woods placed makeshift crosses in order to warn bulldozers which were clearing the site. Furthermore, state DNR officials had started an investigation into the graves. The article states that there are strict laws regarding the disruption of a documented gravesite, and the Willie County Historical Society was searching through old records in an attempt to find documentation of a burial. The article states the legend that the two children fell ill and died around the same time. The parents, overwhelmed with grief, chose the burial site carefully. The grave rested just inside the woods, at the top of a small hill, nestled in a grove of old hickory trees, not far from the location of an old wagon trail. Local residents reminisced about visiting the graves and paying reverence to the souls buried there. Speaking more with the Churubusco History Center, I was informed that the graves are lost. An attempt was made to search for them during the Thresher's Ridge expansion, but was unsuccessful. Even if the developers had stumbled onto the location, they would not have informed anyone for fear of repercussions. I initially intended this video to be about my paranormal experience, but I now believe that whatever I saw was calling me to share the story of the babes in the woods. The graves are now lost, but this video will be a memorial to them and the legend that once was well known in our town.